I'd like to thank you very much, President Lee Sung-yoon, President of KEXIM, and of course, Dr. Kim, Vice Minister of the Economy and of Finance of Korea, for your stimulating addresses. I'm pleased to join you, the CEOs of Korea Business Corporations, heads of financial institutions, and business leaders from across Africa, as well as our ministers, for this business forum. Africa, ladies and gentlemen, is a continent that cannot be ignored by investors. Despite global economic challenges, African economies posted a GDP growth rate of 3.8% in 2022, higher than the 3.4% of the global average. And 5 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa, a further indication of the resilience of the continent. Africa is a continent of opportunities waiting to be tapped. The size of the consumer expenditures is expected to rise to $2.5 trillion by 2030. The African Continental Free Trade Area, which is the largest in the world in terms of number of participating countries, is estimated to have a value of $3.5 trillion. Now, with a population of 1.3 billion people, a youthful population of 477 million people, with rapid urbanization and rising incomes of the middle class, Africa is the leading emerging market frontier. Africa is clearly open for business. Therefore, Korea should support Korean businesses to invest more in Africa. Now, bilateral trade between Korea and Africa is important and is rising. Bilateral trade increased from $17.9 billion in 2017 to $28.8 billion in 2022, an increase of 60%. Korean multinational companies are investing and are expanding in Africa. Examples include Samsung and POSCO Stick, Hyundai Motors, we all know Hyundai Motors, and LG Electronics. KT Corp, for example, is one of the top 2 Korean telecommunication companies with substantial investments in Rwanda. Nonetheless, much needs to be done to improve trade and investment between Korea and Africa. Total exports to Africa from Korea represents only 2% of its total trade with the world, while imports from Africa represents also 2%. Now, this needs to change, given the huge economic opportunities and investment potential Africa provides, as we also heard from the president of the KEXIM Bank. Now, I think we need to take a look at these numbers. We need to add 1 somewhere. Either it is 12%, so 1 is in front of 2, or 1 is after 2, that would be 21%, so that we can have a really exciting trade with you here in Korea. I think you should clap for that number shift. Mr. President, I hope you noticed what I said. But not 2%. Also, Korea's foreign direct investment stock in Africa, estimated at $2.9 billion in 2020, represents a 7.2% decline since 2019. So if there is a message, it is this: Korea's FDI to Africa should expand, and trade with Africa should expand as a share of global trade. The energy and agriculture sectors offer huge opportunities for trade and investments with Korea. The size of the food and agricultural market in Africa will rise to $1 trillion by 2030. A big opportunity exists for investment in the development of special agro-industrial processing zones. The African Development Bank and its partners are investing over $1.5 billion in the development of these zones, with 25 zones now under development in 11 countries. Our flagship program, called the Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation, has so far delivered climate-smart agricultural technologies for over 12 million farmers, especially for maize, for rice, and wheat. In Ethiopia, for example, the wheat varieties, under heat-tolerant wheat varieties that we provided, expanded from 5,000 hectares in 2018 to over 2.2 million hectares this year, turning Ethiopia, for the first time in its history, into a net exporter of wheat. So to boost food productivity, assure food security and self-sufficiency and self-reliance, the Feed Africa Summit was held this year in Dakar between the African Development Bank under the leadership of President Macky Sall of Senegal, and it was attended by 34 heads of state and government. There we developed what's called Food and Agriculture Delivery Compacts that sets the roadmap of exactly what Africa needs to do to achieve food self-sufficiency within 5 years. And I'm delighted that we were able to mobilize globally $72 billion to implement these food and agricultural delivery compacts. These compacts are driven by public-private partnerships, and there are significant opportunities, therefore, for private sector all across the value chains. And in this case, I would like to also say that President KEXIM Bank, we're excited about the Korea Rice Belt initiative that you're doing, because we have a $650 million program also for rice in Africa. So I see a convergence there, and I think ahead of the Korea-Africa Heads of State Summit next year, we should actually be able to launch something together on that. I think it would be phenomenal to do so. Also, Your Excellencies, one of the high five priorities of the bank is to light up and power Africa. In the past 7 years, the bank has invested over $8.7 billion in the power sector. Our work has also so far allowed 20 million people to be able to have access to electricity. Over 7,700 kilometers of transmission lines have been built. 3,700 kilometers of regional interconnections have been done for regional power pools, and 75,000 kilometers of power distribution lines. And since we launched the New Deal on energy, when I became president, access to electricity in Africa has increased from 35% in 2016 to 56% in 2021, a remarkable achievement. Yet, close to 600 million people still do not have access to electricity, and 970 million people do not have access to clean cooking energy. In a report that we launched last week at the Africa Climate Summit with the International Energy Agency, that report estimates that we will need to have investments of $23 billion annually in electricity to achieve universal access to electricity by 2030. A big part of this, of course, has to be in renewable energy, for which the continent has enormous potential, especially for solar, for hydro, for wind, and for geothermal energy sources. Africa, for example, has 60% of the world's solar resource potential. And so the continent should be the leader when it comes to solar. Yet only 1% of that solar potential is currently utilized. The African Development Bank has launched a program. It's a $20 billion program called Desert to Power, and it's developing 10,000 megawatts of solar power across 11 countries, all across the Sahelian zone of Africa. And the goal is to provide electricity for 250 million people. And when it is done, it will be the largest solar zone in the world. And I'm pleased that here in Korea we got support from the Green Climate Fund that put in $150 million. We have other partners, such as the Agence Française de Développement from France for $100 million, the Rockefeller Foundation, GEA program, $35 million, and the government of Sweden with $20 million. Great opportunities exist for you as investors, especially in power grids across Africa. The International Energy Agency estimates that this investment opportunity alone could be as high as $40 billion per year between 2026 and 2030. Many countries, I must say, in Africa today are allowing the private sector to move into power transmission networks. A good example is Kenya, where the government is partnering with the power grid India's largest electricity company, Africa 50, that is I chair, and I'm delighted with the great work that they are doing, and the African Development Bank to develop a private transmission line, the first power transmission line that's private ever on the continent. I also want to say to you as investors that Africa offers strong investment opportunities in green metals that will drive global market growth in renewable energy clean technologies. The continent holds 80% of the world's platinum, 50% of cobalt, and 40% of magnesium, as well as vast deposits of lithium and graphite. The estimates by the International Energy Agency shows that revenue from copper and battery metals should rise to $100 billion in Africa by 2050. Bloomberg shows that the manufacturing of lithium-ion precursor batteries in Africa will be 3 times cheaper than in China or in the United States, offering investors huge opportunities for establishing lithium-ion batteries in Africa. So these investment opportunities are quite vast for the development of manufacturing capacities for battery energy storage systems and electric vehicles. By leveraging their mineral resources, African countries can create jobs, stimulate economic growth, and reduce their dependence on fossil fuels. Africa, ladies and gentlemen, and especially our friends from Korea, is the perfect place to build batteries for electric cars, lithium-ion batteries to power Korean cars, and so much more. Korea's investment of around $61 billion in your own greening of your own economy, including tripling solar and power, is an example to follow. These investments have created jobs, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and increased the country's energy independence. And your target of over 1 million electric vehicles and 200,000 hydrogen-powered vehicles by 2025 is an incredible investment. And I want to, therefore, turn that investment of yours into an opportunity also for Africa in terms of partnership and making sure that we have co-prosperity. And in that sense, I want to say that Africa holds great opportunities to produce green hydrogen, which is the fuel of the future for aviation, urban transport, fertilizers, and production of green steel. Now, a few countries already here are making headways with investors, including Namibia, that has signed a $10 billion investment with German company called Hyphen. Several other countries with attractive investment opportunities for green hydrogen, including Mauritania, Egypt, Gambia, South Africa, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And that is why the African Development Bank, Africa 50, and partners have launched what we call the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, or AGIA, to mobilize $500 million for project preparation and project development, and to unlock $10 billion of green infrastructure investments from the private sector. Huge opportunities exist, ladies and gentlemen, for the private sector in support of small-sized mini-grids and distributed energy systems, with private equity and venture capital. Also, with several large-scale solar projects being implemented, opportunities exist for bulk procurement of solar panels and technologies for countries, as well as for local manufacturing of solar panels. And I had great discussion on this over dinner yesterday with the president of the Exim Bank. I am very pleased that the Korea Trust Fund is now supporting the analysis of the potential manufacturing of solar panels in Africa. And I think these are great opportunities for companies here in Korea. And of course, we are delighted, President, with the $600 million support of the Korea-Africa Energy Investment Framework that can do many of these things. So I would like to close by assuring Korean investors that Africa is not as risky as you hear. Perception is not reality. Moody's Analytics, in their assessment of default rates on infrastructure globally, showed that Africa has the lowest default rate on infrastructure globally, at about 5.5%. compared to 8.5% in Asia, and Latin America, 13%. The African Development Bank is therefore deploying partial credit guarantees that could reduce some of the risk that faces private sector in Africa, and we are willing to work with Exim Bank to continue to do this to attract investors from here to Africa. The African Development Bank therefore stands ready to support Korean businesses to invest in Africa. The Africa Investment Forum, which the African Development Bank organizes with its partners, have in the past 4 years alone attracted $142 billion of investment interest to Africa, including in energy, agribusiness, roads and transport, health, and digital technology. The 2023 Africa Investment Forum will be held in Marrakesh, Morocco, from the 8th to the 10th of November this year. Africa, ladies and gentlemen, is the place to be for investors. I look forward to welcoming Korean investors there. Let's do it together. Thank you very much.